Good morning. Okay, good morning. Let me just see if I can get this recorder going. Well, I'm sorry? Did she? I just don't know whether it's on. I can't tell there's a...
I can't get it.
So, in fact, I guess it's relevant because I taught this topic here 4 years ago, according to my record. So occasionally I'll go to the Torah Mitzion website and listen to what I said, so that I can, And it wasn't recorded. It wasn't recorded. What?
Don't make the same joke.
That's right. That's right. Well, you never know. Okay.
The jokes that people laugh.
That's harder. But so I have no idea whether this is recording. Anyway, there's no. Here, let's see. I'll hit pause 1 minute. It's recording. It's recording. Yes. Okay. So for the first 3 minutes, people if they listen, they'll like, what the heck is going on? Anyway, so I want to discuss. This is one of those type of topics which could easily had a, I don't know, the way that in my document it was. It works out. 4 sides. That's what happens here as well. But I easily could have given 10 pages of Makorot here. So I'll reference certain things Ba'al Peh, and I find it a fascinating topic because it also is one of those topics where there's a nice intersection between looking at things from a practical perspective and looking at things from, I guess, not only from an intellectual perspective, but also from a lumdus perspective. So the two sort of, you can ask yourself to what extent was it, which fueled which. It's a nice little sugya. The question, a simple question, right? Shavuot is the Chag which comes out the latest of any of the Chagim during the year. In terms of when it begins, when the sun sets, it's the summer, and it's generally it's in June, so it's this year it's a little bit earlier in May, but it's close to the solstice, so you're getting very close in the northern hemisphere, at least, to the longest day of the year, and so this is the type of Chag where you would like to perhaps begin it a little bit earlier, right? So can you do so? And the answer, of course, should be, why not? If anything, it's designed for it. And this is a topic in of itself, since you can bring in every Shabbat early, and you can bring in every other Chag early without, each one has its own problems attached to it, or many of them do. But still, in theory, you could bring things in early, and that's another shiur, because why? If you think about it, we'll touch upon it. But why should you be able to? After all, when the sun sets, when it becomes dark, that's when the Vayhi Vayivoker, not Vayhi afternoon before, right? But it's Vayerev. So that's what it should be, and whenever the day begins, the day begins. But yet we can do that. So why shouldn't we be able to do it for Shavuot? Right? That's really the question. And we'll discuss it. So here, it pays to look at the psukim, which are going to become important for us. The psukim that we read last week, and we're all familiar with them, that count from the day after Shabbat, which Chazal understood the first day of Pesach. 7 complete weeks, right? That you should have. Ad mirachal Shabbat Hashviyit tisperu 50 yom, and you'll have 50 days. V'hikraftem mincha chadasha l'Hashem, the way that's normally understood, 50 days from because if the count was complete, so then it becomes the 50th day is the Chag. Ukratem be'etzem hayozeh mikra kodesh yelachem kol melachet avodo lo ta'asu chukat olam b'chomo shvotechem l'dorotechem. So, okay, then you will. This is the Chag, which is determined not by the date, right? It's determined by the count. Because after all, when you think about it, and today, it will always fall out on the 6th of Sivan, for example. However, when the calendar was more fluid, and it was dependent on the decision of the Beit Din, so it could theoretically fall out on the 5th of Sivan. It could fall out on the 7th of Sivan. Just working it out. Nisan in our calendar is always 30 days, without variance, and ER is always 29 days. So, given that fact, so when you count the 49 days from the 16th of Nisan, you will invariably finish the count on the 5th of Sivan, and the following 50th day will invariably be the 6th of Sivan. But if you were to have two 29-day months, right, so then it would become the 7th of Sivan. And if you had two 30-day months, so then it would be the 5th of Sivan. And in fact, and now is not the time to get into it, just to bend your minds a little bit. According to the accepted, there's a bit of a machloket in the Tanaim, but the Deya, which is most accepted in the Misorah of Chazal, was that Matan Torah took place on the Shabbat, and Pesach was, the first day of Pesach was, what day of the week? Thursday. And if you do the math, that's not 50 days, it's going to be 51 days, and therefore it becomes that the Matan Torah was on the 7th of Sivan, not on the 6th of Sivan, right? So there are all sorts of issues. How can we call it Zman Matan Torah Teinu if it's not the same day? And the one answer, which seems to be the answer, is that because it's based on the count, it doesn't matter what the date is. We're not looking at the date. This is the one holiday, right, where the date doesn't matter. And also, other questions are, if that's the reason, why in Chutz La'aretz are there 2 days? The whole purpose, the whole problem of the Chutz La'aretz is that they don't know when Beit Din accepted it, right? So here, all you have to do is count. You know when Pesach was, because after all, I don't know, 15 days, 20 days, 25 days, 30 days later, you'll know, right? So then just count backwards and work it out. You'll know. Okay, so fine. These are all questions that are raised, right, and to be thought about. But the idea is that ultimately the holiday is a holiday which is based on the Sphira. Yes?
And what about in the Bereshis, when we have Yom HaShishi,
okay,
saying the Ha is supposed to be, that's the Shishi is supposed to be, that is the 6th. The 6th is the 6th of Sivan.
Okay, could be. Well, it's like, okay, that's a nice drasha. So here we have the just Sukim, as I said, lots of shiurim which are enveloped in those psukim. However, the Rashi here, when he talks about the pasuk of Tmimot Tihiyana, so he introduces an idea which Chazal talk about in the Gemara Menachot. We read it, those people learning Daf Yomi, we learned it about a month and a half ago. So, Milamed shematchil umone mi ba'erev. She'im lo ken enan tmimot. Rashi, with this idea, what is this Sheva Shabbatot tmimot? Whole, complete weeks they will be, because a week is a week. So what's a complete week as opposed to a incomplete week? So Rashi says that, again, based on Chazal, that the Tmimot is that this is the idea of that you are supposed to count at night. You're supposed to incorporate the entire day, the entire 24-hour period, into your Sfirat Omer, and it translates into Halacha as as you may be familiar with, that if for whatever the reason you didn't count at night, so therefore you don't say the bracha, you only say it at the day, because perhaps if you're making the count and it's not counting the complete day, so you shouldn't be counting. It's safek brachot. So okay, so that's the idea of tamimah. No mention with regard to this concept at all, with regard to Shavuot, at least to the best of my knowledge. Nothing in the Mishnah, nothing in the Gemara, nothing in terms of the Gaonim, the Rishonim, etc. We now come to the end of the 16th, the beginning of the 17th century. And we have a very influential work, the Shlosh Shnei Luchot HaBrit, and Rav Yeshaya Levi Horowitz in Krakow. And he, many things that he writes impact very strongly on Minhag Ashkenaz particular. And he says, Chag Shavuot hu asher tziva Hashem yitbarach la'asot chag achar shiva Shavuot shel Sfira. So he's explaining the calendar, and he says, okay, Chag Shavuot is this holiday after that we all know, after 7 weeks of counting. V'kibalti mimori hagaon Rav Shlomo miLublin. Shekibel mipi ish ed mipi hagaon Rabbeinu Yaakov Falak Zatzal, who, as you can see the date, who lived in the end of about 100 years or so before the Shla, and he just parenthetically is recognized as the first significant rabbinic figure in Poland. Jews were living in Poland from, I think it's recorded from the 12th century, maybe even a little bit earlier. But the first significant rabbinic figure who's recorded is this Rabbeinu Yaakov Falak. Shelo la'asot kodesh v'le'echol kiddush, v'le'echol b'leil rishon shel chag Shavuot ad tzeit ha'kochavim. Right, you shouldn't say kiddush. Right, and I underline that those three words, shelo la'asot kiddush, until on the first night, until tzeit ha'kochavim. By the way, we have this elsewhere, right, with regard to, let's say, Leil HaSeder. So in Leil HaSeder, so because you're not supposed to eat the Korban Pesach until night, and so the entire meal the entire Seder revolves around the Korban Pesach, so therefore we don't begin the Seder before dark, and you're not supposed to make Kiddush before dark. And so he says something similar with regard to Shavuot. V'hata mipnei shebesvira ktiv sheva Shabbatot tmimot tiyena. What, I'm sorry? Oh, okay. So I heard Shavuot. Okay. So anyway, so the first because we have this Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot Tiyana, this idea of complete weeks. V'im ken kishemekadesh miBa'od Yom mechaser oto b'miktzat mi memtet yimei asfira. So you will, if you are bringing Shavuot in early, you're nipping away at the edge of the 7 complete weeks. Shaharei Chag Shavuot hu lachar Sfira. Chag Shavuot has to be after the Sfira.
But you still can daven early then.
Right? So that's why I underlined Lasot Kiddush. So this is similar to, let's say, the first night of Pesach. Because first night of Pesach, there's no problem to daven Arvit earlier. The only problem is to start to have the Kiddush. And that also is a different sugyad. Is it a Kiddush? Right? Can it just be a question of reaching the matzah? What do you do? And we'll talk about it with regard to Shavuot for people who can't stay up that late, etc. So it's become relatively popular or at least commonplace, that there is an earlier minyan on Leil Pesach, and you're just careful not to start the Seder itself until making Kiddush, until Tzeit HaKochavim. Right? So you get there, and that way you can set everything up, and you can sing, Kadesh, Urchat, etc. You can do all of that, get everyone ready, right? Have your first round of arguments around the table, get that out of the way, and then you can have the kiddush. Okay, so that is so that's at the earliest that you can do the Seder. So he seems to do the same type of thing with regard to Shavuot. Va'al tishiveni, but he says, so why did you daven early? If the whole issue is because you don't want to have an incomplete count, so how could you daven Ma'ariv? Right? So he's aware of this. Al tishiveni mashamit palilin as hatfilah mi ba'od yom. So if you're davening your Ma'ariv earlier, so you're also bringing in Shavuot earlier. So that's Zaino Klum, that's not a question. Rav Yoshi tzali shel motzei Shabbat b'Shabbat k'di'ita b'brachot afagav da'adayin mamash Shabbat gamorhu. The pure halacha is that if, for whatever the reason, the same way that you can daven Arvit early on Friday night, so you can daven Arvit early on Shabbat, for Motzei Shabbat. And the Arvit that you'll daven is the Arvit of Chol. And you'll say Havdalah with that. Now, you can't go to the movie and say, well, I let out Shabbat early. The Kedusha of Shabbat continues, but the Tefillah itself, since there is what he's arguing is that there's a disconnect between Tefillah and bringing in the Kedusha, or bringing in the following day. So without getting into all of the details, because that itself would take up the time of how to look at the sugya in brachot and try to unpack that. But basically that is the claim. In other words, what really begins the day? The Kiddush. So the fact that I davened a little bit earlier, that's okay. So but you have to wait for the Kiddush. As I said, even that is a Chiddush. Right? There's no record of this kind of Shita for argument's sake. He lived was born in 1460. For argument's sake, if he made the argument in 1490, but until that in halachic history, there is no recorded dayah that says that. Okay, so this is where it's coming in. But it continues, right? A little bit later, right? The Taz, one of the most important commentaries to the Shulchan Aruch. So he, right? He's also a younger contemporary of the Shla. So he brings this idea, and he says, "Ma'achrin lahatchil arvit." So his interpretation of this idea, and this is, if you take a look, you'll see in Siman Taf Tzadi Daled in the Shulchan Aruch. So the Taf Tzadi Daled just is the Tefillot of Shavuot, right? And the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah say what they say, and the Taz and the Magen Avraham, who's there as well. The Magen Avraham basically quotes the Shla, and he says it shouldn't make Kiddush. But both of them are before they actually comment on the Shulchan Aruch, because there's no text in the Shulchan Aruch that they can pin this halacha to. So they have to, as it were, this is an intro to Taf Tzadi Daled. He says, by the way, you should know the Tefillot of Shavuot, the whole thing is only going to start when it becomes dark. Until then, you shouldn't do that. The Taz's opinion, taking this about 100 years or so later than that, 150 years later even, the super commentary on the Taz, the Pri Megadim, so he says that this is the accepted custom. And then indeed, if you take a look at the Mishnah Berurah even later, you'll see that this has become the custom, not to daven Arvit before Tzedek Kochavim. The rationale, presumably, being that that with all due respect to the idea that you can daven Arvit earlier on Shabbat, which the minhag isn't to do. You'll see in a moment why. But the idea that we do accept the tefillah with the tefillah the Chag, so this is become the understood, whether it's a just by the default position, or it's the tefillah itself which brings in the chag. So therefore, we still want, but it's the same core idea that we want to have Sheva Shabbatot Tmimot Tiyena, but it's not a question of kiddush; it becomes a question of arvit. And having said that, there's pushback already in the later centuries, and probably there was pushback in the earlier centuries as well. But prominent achronim push back. So, for example, Rav Yaakov Emden. It's interesting. It's spelled as the name. It's spelled with an ayin. In the city is spelled with an aleph. But okay. So Rav Yaakov Emden, right, is from northern Germany, right near the border with Holland. So there he says the following, that the quoting this halacha, so in his siddur, his notes for Shavuot, so he says there are those who wait. So the fact that there are those, does that mean already that it's not the accepted minhag, or he just wants to, because he's going to undermine this, even though it is the accepted minhag, he's just saying it as yesh shema acharin, there are those, hard to say, but he says v'hu diktuk chalush mechudash me'achronim. It's based on a very weak type of diuk that, somebody like, tmimot, it has to be complete, right? We saw Rashi gives a different explanation for tmimot. Tmimot means that the days themselves, the full day count. You're coming up with this very weak and new understanding of the pasuk. Ubi shebakdim litpalel b'shiur shemosifin michol al hakodesh harei zariz v'niskar. Says just the opposite. It's a mitzvah. In fact, and this is another shiur. Is there a mitzvah in general to be mosif mehachol al hakodesh? We have the day beginning, but the fact that it's not only a question of that I can, perhaps I must make the day, whether it's Shabbat. That's the reason why the 18 minutes, without getting more into the discussion now, but that's why we have those 18 minutes. Or here in Yerushalayim, the 40 minutes. That's another shiur. But the question is that the idea that you're saying that there's an extra amount of time that you are giving to Shabbat. The fact that you let Shabbat out later, right? So according to many opinions, it's a machloket, but still, according to many opinions, that's a mitzvah d'oraita in order to do that. So basically, what he's saying is, what you're trying to do here is not only is it unnecessary, but it's problematic. You should make Shavuot earlier, and the fact that you don't, right? So that's something which should be censured. It's not only the Rabbi Yaakov Emden. So a very important perush, not well known. The perush, it's there on the daf. If you open up the rush, it's the Korban Netanel, but it's a Rav Netanel Weil who lived in southern Germany in Karlsruhe. But he, if you take a look, if you go online, you look for his picture, he looks a bit like a pirate. The portrait that we have, and has a pirate hat. Very interesting portrait of him. But he is he is one of the primary commentaries on the halachot of the rush. The rush is much earlier and much more is a very influential in terms of the development of psak halacha. And he, in the discussion in psachim with regard to, which we'll reference quickly, maybe not reference because of time, but the Gemara talks about how on the Mishnah in Psachim talks about how you're supposed to start the Seder late, and you're not supposed to eat until lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. It's the Mishnah. It's source number 9 here on the sheet. So where the Mishnah says so, and there's the discussion that is there. So the rush is very similar to this Tosfot. I'll just take quickly look at number 10. So ad shetechsha makshinan amai itzroch ad shetechsha pshita. Right? Why does the Mishnah have to say that you're not supposed to eat until it's dark. The chiddush of that Mishnah is that you're not supposed to have a significant meal on Erev Pesach because it will dent your appetite on Leil HaSeder, and you should be eating the whether it's the matzah, the Pesach, etc., with a gusto. So, okay, I get that, but why do you have to say don't eat until it's dark? That's when the Yom Tov starts. So not going to eat till it's dark. You just should say Erev Pesach Samuch Lemincha Lo Yochal Adam. That's all. Why Ad Shetechshach? So he gives a couple of reasons. One is that the first answer, it's a Rimi Korval, and this is what the Rush brings as well, that, just to take a look at in bold, Aval Sudat Shabbat v'yamim tovim matzi acholu mi ba'od yom. Ki da'amar b'perek tfilat hashachar mitpalel erev shel Shabbat b'erev Shabbat v'omer kiddush hayom mi ba'od yom. Why does the Mishnah have to say specifically on Leil HaSeder, don't eat until it's dark? Because normally on Shabbat, on Chag, you can eat before it's dark. So here, we have to stress on Leil HaSeder, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, that you're not supposed to eat until it's dark. However, there's a second answer that's brought that which is Rabbeinu Yehuda, that even if on Shabbat and Yom Tov you would need to wait until it's Shetechshach normally, right? However, here we have to say specifically that on Leil HaSeder that you can't make it earlier, because I might think, even though normally I should wait till it's dark on every Shabbat, because of we'll talk about why for a second. But nevertheless, on Erev Pesach, I might think it's mutter, because I shechted the Korban Pesach in the afternoon. So if I can shech the Korban Pesach, maybe I can start eating it before dark. So no, the Mishnah has to say you have to wait till Leil HaSeder itself to eat. So in any event, that's the background for the Korban Netanel. So he, getting back to source number 7, so he says, Mikan raya delo k'magen Avraham. I can now prove from this discussion in the Tosfot that everything that the Magen Avraham, who, as I said earlier, he follows the Shla down the line, and it's the Taz as well, that the Belel Shavuot en mekadshin al hayayin ad tzeda kochavim dichtiv timotiyana. Words. Here we see explicitly, why does the Mishnah have to say Ad Shetechshach specifically with regard to Leil HaSeder? Because it's only Leil HaSeder. Every other Yom Tov can be that you can do it earlier as well. So there is significant pushback. Now, I just, in this little table that I hear, when I tried to get it on my printer, it was all on one page, but it doesn't matter. I took June 1st as the date for these times, because that's sort of an average time for when Shavuot falls out. This year it's a few minutes earlier. Next year it'll be a few minutes later when it's the middle of June. But basically I took June 1st as a good average date for when Shavuot falls out. And you can see, for us this halacha is a bit of a nuisance. To wait till to wait to start your Shavuot till it's so late. And you'd like to start perhaps a little bit earlier, get your meal in, and now with an additional minhag of Tikkun Leil, which has become so popular, of Tikkun Leil Shavuot, and you want to get to the first shiur, etc. So it'd be nice to be able to start your meal a little bit earlier. And it's the summer. So for us, it's a bit of a nuisance, right? The sun sets here at 7:41. I think the Plag HaMincha, I should put Plag HaMincha as the earliest that you can make, is in the range of 6 o'clock or so. And the Tzeit HaKochavim that you have to wait for is a little bit after 8. And if you want to go for Rabbeinu Tam, it's 8:53. You'll see why I talked about Rabbeinu Tam in a second. But in Europe, it's a real problem, right? Because if you're talking about relatively southern Europe, in terms of not southern Europe in terms of Italy, but for Ashkenazic Jewry, so Krakow is and those places are the latest that you're going to be getting. So the earliest, if you will, getting. So already you're talking about waiting till 9:12 to start to daven, okay? But that is a kula, because we all assume that that Rabbeinu Tam, those people who wait 72 minutes, etc. So that's a chumrah. That was the accepted minhag until the Gra. Okay, without getting into it, that's a series of shirim. But the point is that was the accepted minhag. It was when they were talking about waiting till Tzeda Kochavim, right? So they were talking to waiting till 10 o'clock, right? 7:53, 9:53. Okay, and that's in Krakow. But if you go a little further north, which is on the flip side, okay, so there, right? So if you're going to Emden or you're going to the Karsula is about the same, a little bit later, but not much later. But in northern Germany, right, there's a question mark for Rabbeinu Tam because the Rabbeinu Tam time is based on the Tzeit HaKochavim but it's so far north that already you don't have total darkness at this time of year.
Wow.
Okay, and you can see that in a little bit further north in St. Petersburg, which wasn't really an issue for them at that point, but St. Petersburg, right? Tzeit Shabbat is after midnight, but it's sort of done. It's already the northern lights, so the white lights. Excuse me. So that is already where they're using mathematical and not based on what they're seeing in terms of true darkness. Right? So you're telling people in effect that you have to wait to start your Chag until about 11 o'clock. Right? So it makes Tikkun Leil Shavuot that much earlier, because also the sun comes up that much earlier and all of that. But still, it's this minhag. You see, okay, it's at most around here, right? It's a bit of a nuisance, but it's tolerable. Where Rabbi Yaakov Emden was talking about, and it was much more than a nuisance. Right? So this is you can understand why he is, feels that this is really, especially since it's based on something so late, is going to, we're going to push back on it. I'll just say that, yeah.
And one can argue the opposite. One could say that normally on Friday night when you want to go to bed, you should be eating early. But on Shavuot, what's the big difference? You're going to be staying up all night learning anyway.
Okay.
So who cares what time you eat?
Okay. At that time, by the way, this is also the beginning of when that minhag begins to snowball. Until there's a reference in one of the tshuvot of the Beit Yosef, how when he decided to have a Tikkun Leil Shavuot in Tzfat. And to have this tikkun for the sin of our forefathers for going to sleep before Matan Torah, and he couldn't get a minyan, right? And the angel came to him in a dream, and he wants to know. He said, if you're serious about the reason why you did not merit a full revelation was because you didn't get a minyan. So he did a minyan. He got a minyan together the following night, the second night, right? Which is, as I said, Zayin Iyar, when the night of Matan Torah itself. So this is it's a very late minhag. It's become so incredibly popular. There are those who also connect it with the rise of drinking coffee. Right? Is that in general, if anyone's interested, I could send you a very interesting article that basically points out how with the introduction of coffee into the old world from which only really happens in the 16th century and introduction of coffee houses, there becomes in general a move away from minhagim that are done at the crack of dawn to minhagim that are done around midnight.
Wow.
Okay, no, it's because people are able to stay up later, right, as part of it. Right, so there is this interplay between these different things. So but the idea that even in my own lifetime, right, the number of people who stay up for Tikkun Leil Shavuot now, as opposed to 40 years ago, Right? It's grown exponentially, right, in this regard. Though, as someone who has given shiurim at 3 in the morning, I could tell you, Baruch Hashem, 3 in the morning is still safe for sleeping. I'm right there with the machaber, barely getting a minyan if I get a minyan. Yeah.
Going back to the very like random whatever, has anyone ever looked at the idea of what was happening in society at that time, so that they were perhaps looking to be able to done earlier because of the issue of safety and what was
In general, people davened early. As I said, it's again, depending on what you mean by early, because what we would consider to be Shabbat, right? The sun set, it's Shabbos, right? Everyone uses the 18 minutes, and somebody's calling out, 3 minutes till Shkia, da, 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 right? All of that. It's that, first of all, they don't have watches. So, the whole idea of a personal watch only becomes an issue in the 19th century. Right? They don't have watches. But but that whole thing of the sun is about to set, etc. No, they accepted their Shabbat because, as I said, the Gra was the one who really impacted on this and changed halachic history here. But what we consider to be Ben Hashmashot and dark, that was still before Shabbos, which was very useful. Not that this was the reason, but was very useful in the winter. Because here we're talking about how late it is. In the winter, it's that much earlier, right? Shabbat coming in at 2:30 in the afternoon, etc., 3 o'clock in these places. But so when it was what we consider to be already even very close to Shabbat coming out, they are still haven't brought Shabbat in necessarily. When they talk about making it early, right, it could be around when we just normally do it. That's what they're doing. So they would, especially in the summer, they would make it early because they wanted to go to sleep as well. Right. So all of this is I don't think that anything in particular is happening here in the 18th century as opposed to in the 16th century. Though I might be wrong. I haven't seen anyone raise that as a possibility. I just brought one. I haven't gotten to the lumdus. I want to get to the lumdus. But before I get to the lumdus, just on a halacha l'masa side, the really very interesting tshuva that I found very interesting, at least, in the I don't know when it was. I think one of his later tshuvot because it's chelek chet, but I don't know. It's not. It is dated. I didn't put the date in. It's from the 1990s. So Rav Vosner Zatzal, and was one of the leading poskim in Bnei Brak. So he has a very interesting question. So that particular year, I think it was 93. Asher sha'al kvodo nero ya'ir b'chag shavuot haba leinu l'tova b'motzei Shabbat Kodesh. Okay, so this is like last year. That the Shabbat is coming in on Shavuot is a Sunday. So you have a 2-day Shavuot like we have this year, but in the other direction, right? That it's Shabbat and then Shavuot. So then the question is, want to know, Ha'im yicholim lekabel Yom Tov v'lasot kiddush lifnei tzeit hakochavim kemo b'Shabbat she'acharei Yom Tov. Right? We know that if there is this year, right? There's no question. Everyone agrees. If you want to make kiddush early, except Shabbat early, this on Shavuot, from Shavuot into Shabbat, so you can do that and make an earlier Shabbat. So the same way that you can do that. So this is, he says, he wants to do it in the other way. He wants to bring Yom Tov in when it's still Shabbat. Can I do this? And the question is, v'nogel is kenim v'chein batei cholim shetzrichim la'achilam kodem. Right. So here it's not in St. Petersburg. We're talking about here. We're in Bnei Brak. Right. We have people who are older. We have people who are in hospitals. They want to give them their Yom Tov meal at a reasonable hour. And if we wait until they'll be serving dinner at 9:30. And that's just too late for people. So, can you do it earlier? וכן ילדים או אנשים חלשים יכולים לקדש חג שבועות כבר אחרי פלג המנחה. Right? So, can you make a Yom Tov early on Shabbat? And so he answers. He quotes the Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch that we talked about, how you can daven Motzei Shabbat on Shabbat itself, and he says that we normally refrain from doing this because why don't we daven? So because there are really two reasons. One is that it doesn't help you. Usually, right? To daven Ma'ariv early on Friday, to make Shabbat early, that helps you. But what do you gain by davening Ma'ariv early on a Shabbat afternoon? So there are certain circumstances that it helps you, that you can, be ready just as Shabbat is over, and you don't have to daven at that point. You've made Havdalah, and you can get up. But it's really very rare that it has any true benefit other than on the intellectual level. But there's a problem also, is that people think that you really made Shabbat end early. So we don't want to do this except under extraordinary circumstances, that people don't get the wrong idea that you can finish Shabbat earlier than you really can. So you shouldn't daven Ma'ariv earlier. So he says that this too will be problematic if you make your Yom Tov earlier, not because you daven earlier, because people will think that now maybe you can cook. It's still Friday afternoon, it's still Shabbat afternoon, you can't cook yet, but maybe people say, well, you just made Kiddush of Yom Tov, so you can also heat up some, whatever you want to heat up, and you can't do that, so you shouldn't do that. However, the bottom line, literally the bottom line, what's in bold here, he says, "Alkein rak b'shat hadchak be'emet l'skenim v'chalashim v'chi hagav," and similar circumstances, efshar lahatir u'ulvad lashgiach aleim shelo yavor l'zalzul gam b'mlacha. In other words, if you have a real circumstance that you're running a hospital, you have people who really cannot stay up and they want to have a Yom Tov meal, so then you can do it, but be very, very careful to make sure that people don't make the mistake. Now, he's saying this on a Motzei Shabbat, right? There's no question, right? He doesn't say it explicitly because he wasn't asked the question. But what if this year he were asked, well, can I bring Shavuot in earlier on a Friday night? On a Thursday night for Friday, right? In order to help those people who just can't stay up so late. He would say, of course, right? There's no question. It's not even being asked. The only question is because it's nibbling into Shabbat, right? So then he says it's mutter, but you have to be really careful about it, right? So I'm not a posek. Right, and the minhag has become, in general, to wait, but you have the Shevet Levi, right? I think it's very clear. Yeah.
He's saying very specifically that it's only for people, the elderly people, etc., etc.
Right.
So
on Motzei Shabbat.
So you would have to say that same criteria would apply. Making it earlier Shabbat the day before, according to him. He's not earlier Yom Tov.
No, earlier Yom Tov.
Earlier Yom Tov.
It could be. But he wouldn't. No, I'm not trying to say that he would say run roughshod over what has become the minhag of waiting. So I'm glad that you called me out on that. I would say that if you have a significant need, if you were to ask him, have a significant need, you're running a hospital, or you have, his example, people who are elderly who go to sleep earlier, etc. So then, I think that he would. It's my reading of him is that he would say by all means.
Right. In other words, in that case, not general.
But again, because he also included children in the Shabbat, he says that on Shabbat, Motzei Shabbat, only for those people who really need it. What about on Thursday night? I think that he would say, if you want to make it earlier, you can. I don't know. I haven't been in Bnei Brak on Leil Shavuot. I don't know if there are people who are doing this, making these renegade minyanim. I don't know. I'm just trying to say that there's the tshuva, and you're right. You have to extrapolate what you will. I extrapolate one thing, you want to extrapolate another. I'm not paskening. Not paskening. It's being recorded. I'm not paskening. Okay. All right? And this one should be uploaded, okay? Because 4 years ago it wasn't uploaded. So now, if you were to be able to hear it, the shir that 4 years ago was more on the Lamda side and less on the Halacha L'Masa side. In any event, and those of you who remember the shir know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so that is the, if you will, on the Halacha L'Masa side, understanding it. But is there if you will, a deeper conceptual underpinning for what's going on here in terms of understanding? And I think the answer is yes. So we've already mentioned in the source number 10 this idea that, okay, you see already a bit of a machloket in terms of accepting Shabbat and Yom Tov earlier. And what does that mean? And here let me just bring you a tshuva from the 19th century, end of the 19th century, of the Nitziv. Nitziv writes a great deal about this in terms of in his parish on the Torah, his parish on the Sheiltot. Really, reams of material with regard to his understanding of accepting Shabbat and Yom Tov earlier in general. But here's the question. Al dvar sheila isha she'adlika nerot b'Shabbat kodesh shechal b'Yom Tov. Okay, so it's a Friday night, and this woman lit her candles 18 minutes before. V'nodala avelut. And just after she lights the candles, there's a knock on the door, and there's a telegram, and she finds out, right, that her brother, right, had passed away and had been buried, wherever he was, and that it's already the Shiva has already begun. So now, the question is, and she didn't have time to ask the question, right? She lit her candle, so there's only 18 minutes. So she decides, I'm going to take the initiative. She takes off her shoes, she sits down and accepts avelut for herself until it's dark. The question now is, she goes to the rabbi in the town and asks, Im olala shelo titzarek lidhog avelut achrei hachag. In other words, did this count as Shiva? Right? We're all familiar with the halacha. That Yom Tov breaks Shiva, breaks Avelut. If you started the Avelut, but if you didn't start the Avelut, if a person, Rahmana litzlan, passes away on Erev Yom Tov and isn't buried until Chol HaMoed, so then you have to wait till after the Chag to begin your Avelut. Right? So here this is very significant. Right? So does she have to sit Shiva or not? If she does, she has to wait till after Yom Tov, and then she has to wait a full week. Right? So that's the difference. So what's his answer? He doesn't give a total answer. He gives the chakira, but he doesn't say what he paskins. It's really very funny. V'nira dezet talui im tosefet Yom Tov ba'il gam l'simchat Yom Tov or rak l'shvitat melacha v'lo l'mitzvat simcha. Well, she's accepted Yom Tov by lighting the candles, and that was what she wanted to do. Right? But the question now is her accepting of Yom Tov, which means so now that Shiva didn't really start, but is the acceptance for the simcha of Yom Tov, or simply accepting upon herself not to do melacha, not to do the work? Now, she wasn't thinking in this question, right? Remember, she doesn't know from any of this. She's just lighting her candles. And she's saying it's now Shabbat, it's now, right? She says, right, Nerot, right, of Shabbat and Yom Tov, right? That's what she did. But the question is, what is incorporated, what's packed into that action of lighting the candles? The fact that she can't do melacha, that's understood. But is the essence of Yom Tov, the simcha of Yom Tov, has that, which is what, by the way, breaks avelut. Right? They have the joy of Yom Tov overwhelms the personal mourning of Avelut. So has that simcha kicked in yet by her accepting it or not? So that's the question. That so that's the Nitziv, and he says V'im Neima de'eno moril l'simchat Yom Tov ein morin linhog avelut b'farhesia dahainu lachlotz minav v'leishev al haaretz sharei mikol makom havei kedushat Shabbat she'eino avelut b'farhesia miya asura b'simcha v'sharei davarim shebetzina. In other words, if you say that it's not yet, and nearly that as a result it's not Yom Tov, but in that interim period. So does she, in a normal situation, if you brought in your Yom Tov earlier, so does because this was, remember, a Shabbat as well, do you still have to keep the minhagim of Avelut in your own home, the way that you would do on Shabbat? Those are the question is that in that interim period, and he just says, Yedido ha'amus ba'avodah rabbah. That's the question. Very much. He doesn't answer, right? He just sort of gives the two sides, right? I'm very, very busy. I really wish I could help you out. But that's that is the question. But here, what do you see from this, right? That here he's looking at the question of, okay, on every Shabbat, what have I done? Have I brought in the essence of the day? And in fact, it's become, if you will, Shabbat. It's become Yom Tov. Or have I accepted upon myself, right, certain restrictions? Because if you think about the question, it's a very profound type of question. Because if you say that, because it's a really big jump, it's a leap, to say that I can accept I can turn, if you will, Friday into Shabbos. It's still Friday. How can I turn that into Kedushat Shabbat? So that's decided. You can't. What can I do? I can say, I can accept upon myself certain elements of the day. I can say, okay, I don't want to have I don't want to do malacha. I want it to feel Shabbostic. But it's that I can do. But to change the day itself, what gives us that power? How are we able to do that? Right? So that's the one side of it. The other side is, yes, that's exactly what you can do. Right? And that will determine what, with regard to Avelut, what happened when that woman lit the candles. If she was able to turn the Friday night, the Friday afternoon into Shabbat, into Chag, so then it's too late. Right? She has to wait till after Chag to begin her Avelut. But if she's unable to do that, because we're all unable to do that, so then the Avelut crept in, the Avelut was there, and then was cut off when Yom Tov really began for everybody. Right? So that's that, if you will, that question. We'll skip number 12 right now because of the time, and I'm going to now go to the following question. A very famous. I've said it here too. When I tell my Talmidim, if I say something is famous, it means that I know it, right? If something is right, whenever you hear a rabbi say the famous, right? He knows it. Okay. But if the very famous is that, you should know it. So this is a very famous chakira which is found in the Taz, same Taz that we referenced before. It has nothing to do with Shavuot, it's something to do with Shmini Atzeret. And the question is the following: can I bring Shmini Atzeret in early? No, it's the end of Sukkot, and I want to, here at Simchas Torah also, I want to make the Yom Tov a little bit earlier. Can I do that or not? And he quotes the Maharshal. The Maharshal, who was the great posek contemporary and cousin of the Ramah in 16th century Krakow. So he says the following, that he finds it very. He says the following. I'll just read it. Katav Rashal b'tshuva shera'a Haga b'shem Marav Rabbeinu Tavil shelo haya ochel b'knisat Yom Shmini Atzeret ad halayla. D'im ken haya tzarich levarech leishev b'sukkah kemen da'adayin yom. Here's the question. It's Shmini Atzeret, it's Sukkot until then. So now I make the Kiddush, so it's still Yom Tov, it's still Sukkot, right? So I would have to eat in the Sukkah. But I'm making the Kiddush of Shmini Atzeret, so how can I do that? The Katav Rashal Raya Lezeh Machmat Birchat Leisheh B'Sukkah Im Lo Yomar Oto Zeh Eino Roy Delami Yigra Birchat Mechuyevet. So if you want to, so you're going to now, he says, the moment that I say Shmini Atzeret, so then I can't say the Leisheh B'Sukkah anymore. What I've done is I've brought it in, and the ein lomar dekevin de mosif mechol al hakodesh im kein avar hayom hazeh zeino, excuse me, hayom zeino nihi de mosifin betfilah kideshkan rav tzali shel Shabbat be'erev Shabbat aval lo la'asot laila sharei kriyat shema shel arvit hayom Omer b'shato. In other words, I can bring in the day, but I can't, he says, transform the Sukkot into Shmini Atzeret. Umishum hachi ein ra'oi lispor Omer belel Shabbat achar kiddush ad laila. So he says something which is relevant to us, that you have to wait with your Sfira to Omer until it's actually dark if you bring Shabbat in early. So that's the approach of the Marshal. So the Taz in the next paragraph says Elu divrei harav Rashal va'af she'en meshivin ha'ari la'achar meitav. So even though I can't, I can't have this debate with the Marshal in person because he's already passed away. He lived a generation and a half before him. V'kal v'chomer b'shual kamoni, and all the more so, he's the lion, I'm the fox. How could I argue with the Marshal? Mikol makom echaved dati shedivrei harav ma'ot tmuin ve'en adat shel aniyut dati sovan. I just can't understand what he was. I can't wrap my head around what he was saying. Dilama gazar ta'anit b'chinam mishat knisat shmini atzeret. Because what is the Marshal saying now? Marshal says you have to wait till Shmini Atzeret in order to eat, because if you eat any earlier, you're going to have to make the Leisheh B'Sukkah, and if you bring Shmini Atzeret in, then that will create a problem with the Leisheh B'Sukkah. So you're causing people to fast. Shehu mivod yom, v'hu hechreach detosefet michol ala kodesh hu deoraita, v'akein chayav lihitanot ad halayla, v'zeh vadai hu min hanimna, chad devadai lo have shatku chachamim mizeh. He says that if I accept the Shmini Atzeret, so then I've brought Shmini Atzeret in already when it's still daytime. It becomes Shmini Atzeret. Uve'emet svara shebana rav alav hu eino kiyum klal devadai mi shemosif. This is on the back page, the top. Mi shemosif mechol al hakodesh hu oseh al pi tzivui toratenu kvar chalaf v'halach mimenu chovat hayom ma shehaya alav kodem. Kodem zeh v'have kimo b'layla u'machar mamash. Okay, in other words, basically what he's saying is that when the problem that the Marshal had is that, what am I going to do? I'm going to, it's a sort of a push me pull you. I could accept the Kedusha, but I can't transform Sukkot into Shmini Atzeret. And the Taz says that's exactly what you can do. When you accept, the idea, it's become it has become the new day. Now this is the same Taz, who said, now you can understand the Taz of Shavuot. Was from the Taz's perspective, and I'm running out of time, so I can't go beyond this. But going back to the idea of Tmimut, of the complete count. So if you were to ask the Maharshal, can I take it in early, and it's now Shavuot early, and you're breaking Tmimut? So he would say, that's not a problem, because it's true you've accepted the Kedusha of the day. right? And we saw also that tziv, that what does that mean? Have you really accepted the full kedusha or just certain elements of it? But even if you accept the full kedusha, but you haven't changed the day, it's still the 5th of Sivan. It's just the 5th of Sivan with the kedusha of Shavuot, right? That you can do. But the Taz is more radical than that. Not only is he saying the way that the if you will, the lowest level, that I'm accepting certain elements of the day. Not only am I accepting the kedusha of the day, the Taz says what I'm doing when I accept every Shabbat early is I'm literally transforming the date. It's no longer Friday. I have the power halachically to transform the day and make Shabbat now not a 25-hour affair, but a 26-and-a-half-hour affair. That's what I'm doing. It's actually the day of, it's Saturday now. It's Friday night. It's not Friday with the Kedusha of Shabbat. And that's what happens every time I do make an early Shabbat, every time that I make an early Chag. So then what I've done is taken Sfirat HaOmer, which should have been 49 days, and now it's become 48 days and 23 hours. Right? It's no longer tamim. It's no longer whole. So it's not just to use the idea of the Rabbi Yaakov Ebden, a newfangled flimsy type of limud. It goes to the fundamental nature of what accepting Shabbat and Yom Tov early is. Right? So that it's now it is really turbocharged. I've not only taken certain elements of the practices, I've not only taken a day and added Kedusha into that day, I've transformed the day of Friday, I've transformed the Chol and turned it into a expanded Shabbat. Right? I've actually changed the date. And if I accept that radical opinion, so then I can understand why it is problematic perhaps problematic to make Shavuot early. However, having said that, I also, that's why I began this year, if you will, with the halachic way of looking at it, not necessarily the lumdus way of looking at it, but with the accepted practices to change things. But as I said, a lot more to discuss, but our time has run out, and no one likes it when I'm being mosif al hashiur. So I will finish here.